Begin the current Daf Masechta Shabbos Daf Kuf Lamed Beis. Begin 6 lines down at the top of the Amud, where we continue the discussion in the previous Daf. We were discussing the opening theme of this paragraph, Rabbi Lezer the Mila, where there was a Machlekes Rabbanan and Rabbi Lezer regarding if Machshirei Mila Deicha Shabbos. Today's Daf we're going to be discussing regarding the actual Mila itself, regarding the circumcision that we're presuming everyone agrees is Deicha Shabbos. Where do we know that from? Shiur's co-sponsor B'Kalzik and Echeskel. Till anytime Daf Chaim. Appreciate everyone who's joining us today for this shiur. The idea, as we said, we opened up this paragraph of Lezer that said Machshir Mila Deicha Shabbos. We're going to discuss the actual Mila itself. Additionally, we're going to be discussing regarding not just Mila being Deicha Shabbos, but also Tzaras. If there's a negative Tzaras, you're not allowed to tear off the Tzaras, the Isim the Torah, but if it's on the Makkah Mila, you're allowed to do the Bris Mila, even though it's going to remove the Tzaras. We're going to learn about where do we know that from. Additionally, the terms and concepts that's called Ein Dana Kabel Chaymer Ma'alacha. You can't learn out of Kabel Chaymer from Halacha Moshe Messinai, because Halacha Moshe Messinai is Torah Shabbat Peh. And Kal V'Chaymer is one of the Yid Gimel Midas Shatayr Shabiksav Nidishbehan. So you can't make Kal V'Chaymer from Halacha Mishmei Sinai. Additionally, the concept of Mechutzi Kapara are those like a Zav, Nezav, and Mitzayr. There's certain people that were Tamei, they have to go through like a 7-day purification process. Although they're already Tahar, they already went to the mikveh, had already sundown, but they still are lacking their atonement. The next day they still need to bring a carbon. They're still in that quasi state that they didn't have their total atonement for their Tahara process. Additionally, the concept of Asay Derech Eloisa say is that the positive commandment overrides the negative commandment. That is, although one that you're going to have to choose one will be over. If you're doing the positive commandment, you override the negative commandment. The Asay is Derech Eloisa say. However, we'll see that that's only be'idna. It's only that the moment you're fulfilling the positive commandment, you're going to be overriding the negative commandment. But if you first have to do the Eloisa say to get to the Asay, then we don't say Asay Derech Eloisa. So begin the current Daf. Kuf Lamed Beis, 6 lines down at the top of the Yomid. We're again, as we said in the Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer, he held Machshir Mila is Deichnas Shabbos. We said, according to him on Shabbos, you could chop the wood to make the coals, to make the iron, to make the knife. You could do that all on Shabbos because he learns out Ubayim Shmini Yom B'Sar Alasef in the word Ubayim that you could even do for the Hechsheri Mila. You could be Deich Shabbos. So that says the Gemara. Okay. Ad Kamli Pligi Rabban Alel. Where do we find the Machlekes Rabbi Lezer and the Rabban in the Mishnah? The Rabban only disagree with him regarding the preparatory acts. That they hold that you can't do that on Shabbos. Mila Gufa, but regarding the circumcision itself, the actual bris Mila, Dirak called Deicha Shabbos. Everyone agrees that that's going to be Deicha Shabbos. Even though you're making Chabura, you're doing different malachas for the Mila. Everyone agrees you're allowed to do that on Shabbos. Says the Gemara, Minola, where do we know this from that you could do the actual bris Mila on Shabbos? So Amar Ula, he says, it's halacha. It's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. It's a tradition that we have from Moshe from Sinai that went down through the generations. And it says the Gemara, he says it's halacha Moshe Sinai. Now, says the Gemara Meisvei. The Gemara asks on this interpretation with the following brisa. It says you can't say that's halacha Moshe Sinai. Why not? It says the Gemara like this. Because the brisa says, Minayin le'pekuach nefesh. From where do we know that when it comes to saving a person's life, shadeiches Shabbos, that overrides Shabbos? Who said you call it tzal on Shabbos? Who said you're doing all these malachas, driving, everything? Who said you could do this? So Rabbi Elazar ben Azar Yomi says, I'll give you a Kabel Chaymer. Ma Mila, if the Bris Mila, interesting, most people don't know this Kabel Chaymer. If Bris Mila, she achas mevav shaladam, it's one of the limbs of a person's body. Doiches Shabbos, but it overrides Shabbos, then you could do it on Shabbos. So Kabel Chaymer, the B'kuach Nefesh. It's Kabel Chaymer, the B'kuach Nefesh. Shadeiches Shabbos. If it's a person's whole body, for sure you could do that on Shabbos. That's the Kabel Chaymer that the Brisa brings. Why you could do Pekuach Nefesh? If you could do Bris Mila, which we didn't say exactly what the source for that is, but if you could do Bris Mila, you could do one limb for a person's body and be Deicha Shabbos, for sure to save the person's whole body. Now, it says the Gemara like this, rejecting Ula's interpretation. If you would think to say that what's the source for knowing that Mila is Deicha Shabbos is halacha l'Moshe Messinai, so Kal V'Chaymer, to make a Kal V'Chaymer to all the other limbs of the body, mehalacha, from halacha Moshe Messinai, mi'asi, can you make a Kabel Chaymer from halacha Moshe Messinai? You're telling me you know that you could save a person's life from Mila, but how do you know Mila is Deicha Shabbos? From halacha Moshe Messinai. Can you make a Kabel Chaymer based on halacha Moshe Messinai? You can't. It says the Gemara Vatanya, we'll learn the brisa that's brought Masechtas Nazir. As Rashi explains the context of this brisa, Rabbi Kiva was making a Kabel Chaymer. He says, how do you know that a revius of dam, have a cup of blood, a revius of dam? How do you know that a nazir is not allowed to drink wine, we know, and one of the things he's not allowed to do is not allowed to become mitama la-mesa. How do we know that the nazir is going to have to cut off his hair and start all over if he touches or if he carries a revius of dam? Says Rabbi Kiva, I'll tell you, if a bone the size of a barley corn is not mitama ba'oil if there was a body and they left a piece the size of a barley corn. If someone walks into the same room as that bone, it does not become tummy. And still a nazir has to cut off his hair and start over if he touches the bone or if he carries the bone, what's called magamasa. So revius have done a quarter of a lug of blood, which if you walk into the same room as that blood, it makes you tummy, like the pasuk says, the nefesh of a mess, a person survives on a revius of dam. Isn't it a kavachayim that the nazir is going to have to cut off his hair and start over? That was Rabbi Kiva's kavachayim. So on that, that's with the brisa. That's why our Gemara begins with that brisa. On that, Amalai Rebbe Lazar, whether it be Ben Azariah or not, Rebbe Lazar tells him, Akiva, Etzim Kesari Metame, your basis of your kavachayim is starting from the halacha of a bone the size of a barley corn. You know, how do we know that that's metama, a bone the size of a barley corn? That's a halacha l'meishim Sinai that a nazir will have to cut off his hair. The revi is dam that you want to come and learn out from a kavachayim. Wait a second, you can't do that. Ve'in dan the kavachayim me'halacha. You cannot learn out a kavachayim to a revi of dam, which would be a kavachayim if etzim kesayr is not metam ba'oil. But yet the nazir would have to start over his naziris by coming in contact with that bone the size of a barley corn. For sure, it's metam ba'oil. He says, no, you can't do that. You cannot learn out a kavachayim from halacha meshemazina. As Rashi explains, why not? Because that's Torah Shabbal Peh. A halacha meshemazina is not written in the Torah. The Yud Gimel Midah Shator Nedrasha Behen that you could expound the Torah, Zera Shava, Klal Prad, all those things are only in Torah Shebiksav. Torah Shabbal Peh does not have those same laws. So you can't make a kavachayim based on halacha meshemazina. That is that brisa. So he's talking about Kiva, you can't do that. Now for our context, you cannot say that the way Ula was saying that Mila is Deicha Shabbos from halacha meshemazina, because then we don't understand the brisa. The brisa says, how do we know Pekuach Nefesh is Deicha Shabbos as a kavachayim for Mila? Kavachayim for Mila is halacha meshemazina. You cannot make a kavachayim from halacha meshemazina. So the Gemara rejects this interpretation of saying that the Mila is Deicha Shabbos from halacha meshemazina. So the Gemara continues and says, Elam Rebbe Lazar says a second interpretation. He says, okay, we got to go back to the drawing board. How do we know Mila is Deicha Shabbos? So he says, Asya Eis Eis. We know from Gzeira Shav from the word Eis. By Shabbos it says in Shemais Lamed Alf, Ki Eisi, Beini Vein Bnei Yisrael. It's a sign. By Mila and Bereshit Zayin says, Vayla Eis Bris. Just like over there, it says the word Eis by Shabbos. So do we hear by Mila when it says to do the Mila, it's also by Shabbos. And that's how we know that Mila is Deicha Shabbos from Gzeira Shav from the word Eis. Says Gemara Elamiyat, if that's the case, and this Gzeira Shav of Eis was said regarding Shabbos, was said already by Har Sinai to expound this for a drasha, to say whatever has the same word as Eis is going to have the halacha being done on Shabbos. So you should learn out the same thing regarding Tefillin. Tefillin, the Chsev ben Eis, it also says the word Eis by Tefillin in Shemais Yud Gimel, by Eis, l'chol Eis al Yadchel, Zikar Menenecha, so L'tchi Shabbos. Tefillin, whatever you have to do for Tefillin, should also be Shabbos, we know it's not. You can't be Deicha Shabbos, let's say the Machshir Tefillin, or whatever it is to Mekayim the mitzvah of Tefillin. Why not? It says Eis over there. So Elamad says, you're right, it's not from the word Eis, because then we would have to go ahead and learn that Tefillin. Rather, Asim Bris. We learn out from the exertion of the word Bris. That you're right, that word Eis was not said over by Har Sinai, and a person cannot make his own Gezer Shabbat to say that it applies like Tefillin. Rather, the word Bris was said, that Gezer Shabbat by Har Sinai. Because by Shabbos it says in Shemais Lamed Alf, L'daireisam Bris Eilam. And it says also by Mila that it's a bris. So that's how we know that Mila is Deicha Shabbos, because it says the same word by Shabbos and it says the same word by Mila. So the Gemara still has a difficulty. If that's the case, then Gadol, an adult who's 13 years old, who his Mila is not in the appropriate time, the Mila is supposed to be on day 8. Anytime after day 8, it's called Shaloi Bezmana. So by an adult, the Chsiv Bei Bris, it says by an adult, the word, the covenant, it says a pasuk in Bereshit Yudzayin, but Orul Zachal Ashaloi Yimo, if there's going to be any male uncircumcised Jew that's not going to circumcise, as Brisi Hofer. So my covenant says the word bris, he nullified. Now that pasuk Rashi explains, it's talking about by an adult, from the fact that he's going to be liable for cars. Because if his father didn't circumcise him, he has to circumcise himself when he becomes an adult. Now that's only when he becomes an adult, because if let's say a 6-year-old boy doesn't have a milah, he's not getting cars, it's not an adult yet. So that's only when he becomes an adult. So that pasuk, when it talks about he's getting cars, is obviously by an adult. So L'tchi Shabbos. So it says by him the word bris, like it says as Brisi Hofer. So his milah when he's 13 years old should override Shabbos. Now the problem is, the Gemara tells us later on in Lamed Beis that even on Yom Tov it's not Deicha unless it's Bismana. Milah Bismana is Deicha Shabbos. Only day 8. Let's say we have to push up the bris for some reason, whether it wasn't well or whatever, or it's fake diyama. We don't go ahead and we don't do it on Shabbos. But why not? It says the word bris. So you said you learned that from the word bris. So then even an adult that says it's brisi hofer should also be deiches Shabbos. See how the Rebbe says, you're right. That can't be the source either. Rather, asi deiris deiris. We learn that from a different word. By Shabbos it says l'deiraisam bris olam. And by the circumcision of a baby of 8 days old, it says "Uben shmeinis yom yimelachem kol zachar l'deiraisam." So learn from that word. It says the word deiris by Shabbos. So the word deiris by an 8-day-old baby, his bris milah, to tell you that just like over there at Shabbos, here too it's also talking about Shabbos. The Gemara doesn't like this either. The Gemara says if that's the case, tzitzis, that's the bei deiris, l'tchi Shabbos. Tzitzis also says in the pasuk in Bamidbar that it's akamve vigdehem l'deiraisam, should also be deiris Shabbos. And to make the tzitzis with not deiches Shabbos, why not? It also says deiris. It should also be deiches Shabbos. So El Amar of Nachman Yitzchak, he concludes. He says, finally, I'll tell you the interpretation. Done in ois bris v'deiris, mi ois bris v'deiris. By Shabbos and Milah, they both say all three words: ois, bris, and deiris. Lafuki Hanach to exclude all the other things that we just mentioned before, regarding tefillin, regarding the bris of a 13-year-old, regarding tzitzis. That the chad hu dechseben. It only says one of them. It doesn't say all of them. Therefore, we're not going to learn from those other things that are deiches Shabbos. We're only going to learn regarding that of Milah that is deiches Shabbos. So that is the source. That's one interpretation for how do we know that Milah is deiches Shabbos. Now, says the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan, he gives a different interpretation, a different source that Milah is deiches Shabbos. It says because Amakra the pasuk says by Yom. It says on the day. Now it doesn't have to say in that day. It could just say. Uvashmini yimo b'sar lasa. What's ubayom hashmini? Bayom afilu b'Shabbos. The day is to say no matter what the day is, you're going to do the milah, even if it's Shabbos. Now Rashi explains. If you recall from the top of the summit from the previous daf, Rabbi Eliezer, he uses bayom to tell you machshir mitzvah. So Rashi had already explained on the previous daf that he's going to learn the milah is halacha mishmisina. So wait a second, didn't we say it can't be halacha mishmisina because of pekuach nefesh? So Rashi explains he doesn't learn out pekuach nefesh from a kabbalah from milah like that Brisa does. He learns out from psukim, as the Gemara learns out in the last paragraph of Shabbos Daf. We have many sources that pekuach nefesh is deiches Shabbos. He learns it from those other sources, and therefore he could learn it out that it's halacha mishmisina, and therefore he uses by yom to tell you machshir mitzvah. But here Rabbi Yochanan is coming to explain, it's not like Rabbi Eliezer, it's like the Rabbanan. They know that Milah itself is deiches Shabbos from the extra word Bayayim, and actually they don't have it extra to teach you Machshir Milah. And they actually disagree with Rabbi Eliezer in the Mishnah. They hold that Machshir Milah is not deiches Shabbos. Now, however, on this interpretation of Rabbi Yochanan, Amalei Rish Lakish le Rabbi Yochanan. Rish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan, he says, El Miatim, that's the case that you learn it from the word Bayayim. It didn't have to say Bayayim Hashmini. It could say that Bashmini Yimo. What's Ubayayim? He said that means no matter what the day is, even if it's going to be Shabbos, Semechusri Kapar. Like we explained in the introduction, those who are lacking atonement, those are people that are tamei, that they already purified themselves, but they still need to bring a carbon on the next day. That's a zav or a zava, which is a male or a female that had this discharge, or a yeled, this woman gave birth, or b'tzaira. By them it says uvayom hashmini. D'chsevu bayom, it says on the day. So achanami didachu Shabbos. Are you telling me that their karbanos are also deiches Shabbos? So then it says no. Humi bayle. That you need to tell you bayom v'loy balayim. That day is not telling you no matter what the day is. It's telling you that they bring your karbanos by the day, not by the night time. So then he asked back. He says, "Hainami b'boyle." So bris milah also don't learn nothing by yom to tell you that it's going to no matter what the day is, even Shabbos can be deiches Shabbos. By milah also by yom yishmin is to tell you by yom b'layla. We know the bris milah can only be during the daytime, not at nighttime. So he says, "No, who is that? You know me ben shmoin is yom nafka." Now we learn now from a different pasuk. It says an 8-day-old baby, not at nighttime, has to be by daytime. So then he says, wait a second, if that's the answer you're giving, then Hainami. Mechusha Kapar, I can tell you the same thing. From the day that he's commanded, which is a pasuk in V'yikra Zion, which it says, Bayim Tzavaisa, on the day that he commanded us, B'nei Yisrael, Hakabes Korbaneim. It says in general, regarding all karbanas, that it has to be during the daytime. That's when Afka. That's when you learn that it has to be by the daytime and not by the nighttime. So then, I'm back to my question on you. Mechusha Kapar, that it says Bayim, you should also learn out that even if it's on Shabbos, because it's not telling you by Yom B'Layla, because you learn from a different pasuk, by Yom Tzavaisai, that we already know all karbanos will be during the daytime. Just to tell me bris milah that you have a different pasuk telling you by Yom B'Layla, and you have an extra pasuk by Yom to tell you that milah is deiches Shabbos. So that he says no. Avagav the nafka mi by Yom Tzavaisai. By karbanos, it's different. I need two psukim to tell you it has to be during the daytime. Why? Because even though I have the general pasuk of all karbanos that it says on the day that he commanded him to bring the karbanos, we know karbanos to be burned during the daytime. I needed to tell you by Yom, by Mechusar Kapara explicitly, because you would have thought to say, since the Torah is more easier on the Mechusar Kapara, Where do we find the Torah is easier, more lax? Is lasui bedalis. He could bring a carbon in a cheaper version. These are what's called carbon oil b'yared. The halacha is that certain people, if they cannot afford a carbon, they can bring a cheaper carbon. They can bring a bird carbon. They can bring a flower carbon. So you would have thought that would be even more lax. But Laila Nami Lacy, they could even bring this carbon at nighttime. That's you need a special pasuk by Yom, by Mechutz Kapara, to tell you it has to be by Yom, but again, it's not like you're asking me that should tell you by Yom even on Shabbos, because you need to tell you at day and not at nighttime, because even though you have a carbon by a pasuk by all carbons has to be during the daytime, Mechutz Kapara need a special pasuk. You would have thought we'd be more lax. Now, on that interpretation of Rabbi Yechanan, Maskav La Ravina asks, he says, wait a second. Elamiyat, if that's the case, then you tell me because by the Mechutz Kapara, they could bring their carbon, a cheap carbon. So you want to tell me that all other invalidations, and you would even think at nighttime also, that you could do it because we're more lax on this person, on this carbon, so then you zar kashban. So a non-kohen should be valid, the einen kashban, and let's say an einen who was a person that, if his relative just died, he's invalid to do the avodah. How do we know this? Because it says by the kohen gadol that he should not be metam himself to his father and his mother, and he shouldn't leave the Beis HaMikdash, and he won't be desecrated in the avodah. The inference is that, for the Kohen Gadol, he doesn't have to leave the Beis HaMikdash. He could do the avodah when he's a einin and not be machal the avodah. But that's only for him. But someone else who does the avodah when he's a einin is going to invalidate. If his relative that died that day, he's not do the avodah. But why? A non-kohen or an einin should be valid, which they says really a non-kohen is not really true because all of them say explicitly kohen. But let's say an einin should be kosher because you should be more lax. That says the Gemara, no, ha'adrei kra. But the pasuk ultimately went back and invalidated for it to be done in the nighttime by even Mechutz Kapar, because it says Ubayayim, like we said. So since regarding nighttime, it has all the halachas of a carbon that you cannot do it at nighttime, so then that pasuk is teaching us that regarding all other areas too, for a zar and ein, and also that it has all the halachas of a carbon, and it's going to have like a regular halacha. In other words, the Gemara is asking, you're telling me that Mechutz Kapar are more lax. Therefore, you would have thought you could do it even at nighttime. So then, okay, if it's more lax, so let a non-kohen do that avodah of this carbon. So say no, but we actually ultimately have a pasuk that says ubayayim that has to be during the daytime and not at nighttime. So really telling you it's like all other carbonos. You would have thought that it's not like all the other ones because it is easier on the person that he can bring a cheap carbon. But once we tell you it has to be during the daytime like a regular carbon, it means for all areas it's going to be like a regular carbon that you have to go ahead and do it with a regular kohen, not with a zar and not with an oinen. Now the Gemara brings another interpretation. So far we said it's halacha l'shmei Sinai, that milas deicha Shabbos. We had the source that said from the pasuk by Yom that no matter what the day is, even Shabbos deicha Shabbos. Or we had ois bris and deiris. Those are the three interpretations we brought that regarding that milas deicha Shabbos. Now the Gemara brings a fourth interpretation. Rav Alcha bar Yaakov says, Amakra, the pasuk says in Vayikra, the pasuk that we quoted before, Uvayom Hashmini says on the 8th day he circumcises the flesh of the foreskin. What does that mean, Shmini? It means whatever is the 8th day, Afilah b'Shabbos, even on Shabbos. And according to this interpretation, what does the Bayim come to teach? Bayim tells you during the daytime and not during nighttime. But the Gemara rejects this interpretation and says, wait a second, Hai Shmini mibayile. You need to say, it's not an extra word to darshan, no matter what the 8th day is. You need it to tell you, Lamutei Shvi. 8 is telling you not on the 7th day. Says the Gemara, no, Shvi, we know it cannot be on the 7th day from a different pasuk in Bereshis, where it says, Ben Shmoinus Yom Nafka. It says within the pasuk that the 8th day old you should circumcise every single male. So from there we already know 8 days. What is this pasuk? But Uvayim Hashmini, the Shmini can tell you that it's an extra word to tell you no matter what the 8th day is. It says no, you still need both Shminis. Chalamutei Shvi, 1 8 is coming to exclude 7. Chalamutei Tishi, 1 is coming to exclude 9. So you need 2 times the word Shmini. None of them are extra to tell you can do it on Shabbos. Because the Imechad, if you only had one of the times, if it only said 1 time 8, I would have said, okay, that's coming to exclude Shvi, who delaymat zamne. It's coming to exclude 7, which it didn't come yet at the time of the Milah. Of Mishmini ve'elach zamne, but I would have thought from 8 and on, it is the time already. You can do the Milah no matter not only 8, but also on day 9. Therefore, you don't have an extra word Shmini to tell you even on Shabbos. So you're right, rather it's clear that Rabbi Yechanan, that the interpretation of the source of Milah being day for Shabbos is like Rabbi Yechanan, that we know it's from Bayoim, not from the word Shmini. That's what the Gemara, Tani Kappa said Rabbi Yechanan. The next time a Bryce that says like Rabbi Yechanan, they were learning out from Uvayoim. The next word of Bayoim, because we already know it has to be during the daytime from a different pasuk. Uvayoim is coming to tell you no matter what the day is, even if it's a day of Shabbos. And Udalekar Rabbi Yaakov, not like this third interpretation of Rabbi Yaakov, that we know it from the word of Shmini. Because the Brisa says like this. The Brisa says, Shmini Yimol, on the 8th day you do this circumcision. Afilah b'Shabbos, even on Shabbos. Now, Uman Mekayim, so how am I going to fulfill the pasuk in Shemais that says that you should safeguard the Shabbos because it's holy for you, and it says Mechalalel Mois Yumas. Whoever desecrates the Shabbos will surely die. Now, one of the malachas that are forbidden to be done is chabura, making a wound. When you're doing a bris milah, you're making a chavala. So how could you say you're doing a circumcision on Shabbos if it's being mechal the Shabbos? Oh, that I'll tell you is b'shar malachas. That's other malachas chutz milah, except for circumcision. That's one option, says the Bryce. Ayena elah for the milah. No, then says the Bryce. No, maybe b'chalel mois yumas means even if you're doing a mitzvah, you're not allowed to do a nisr of Shabbos. How am I going to fulfill that on the 8th day you do the circumcision? That's chutz Shabbos, except if it's Shabbos. But if it falls on Shabbos, you're not going to do the bris milah. So that the Bryce itself is asking this as a question, saying, when I say you do the bris milah on the 8th day, is that even on Shabbos? Or maybe it's not on Shabbos because of b'chalel mois yumas. Oh, it says the Bryce tamalema by yom. That's what we learn now from the pasuk. Since it wouldn't be clear when it says ubayom hashmini, that's to tell you afilu b'Shabbos. That even if it's on Shabbos, it's clearly like Rabbi Yochanan that the source for milah being derech Shabbos is learned from the word ubayom. Now, however, once we brought in the Bryce, the Gemara asks to understand the Bryce. Amarav, it says, Hi Tana, the Tana the Bryce, mi'ikara in the beginning, ma'ikon nichale. Why was it so obvious to him when he was saying that when it says that you do the milah on the 8th day, that it meant even on Shabbos? And he was saying, okay, this says mechalel mois yumas, that's regarding all other malachas. Why did he see fit to presume that Shabbos that milah would be derech Shabbos? Then yet later on in the Brisa, he flip flops and he says, no, maybe milah also is included mechalel mois yumas, because that is the specific pasuk. Mechalel mois yumas includes no matter when you're doing the chilul Shabbos, even for milah. And then he says that okay, Shmini Yimel must be by other days. Michael Kashale, what was the difficulty with his first svara that then he rejects that and he thinks, oh, maybe it's not derech Shabbos, and therefore he needs a pasuk. Says Gemara, says Rabbi Hachkim, and this is what the Tana was saying. Shmini Yimel, the 8th day you do the bris milah. That's a fill of Shabbos. That's even on Shabbos. And therefore, how am I going to fulfill when it says that if you desecrate Shabbos, you're going to surely die, like making a wound? That's b'shar malacha, it's chutz milah. That's when you do a different malacha, not for bris milah, which is a mitzvah. But milah would be derech Shabbos. That was the first assumption of the Tana Brisa. That we know. And that says Rava, what was the svara of the Tana? My Tana. What's the reason? Because kavah chaymer. It's a kavah chaymer. We could learn out to say from a kavah chaymer that when it says mechalel mois yumas, it refers to other malachas, and to say that when it says on the 8th day you do the bris milah, is going to be even on Shabbos. What's the kavah chaymer? Because a mat tzaras, if regarding tzaras, that the Torah tells you regarding a tzaras, you're not allowed to cut off a neg of tzaras. As the Brisa teaches in Masechtas Makos of Chavbez and Al, it says hishama b'neged tzaras. Be careful with the neg of tzaras. What's that? Be careful. It's azhar. It's a prohibition to cut off the neg. And the Torah is very severe in this isser, that shadeiches avodah, it even overrides doing the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. As the Gemara says in Pesachim, Samazayim and Aleph, that tumas mess gets overridden for the carbon of a tzibur. If a tzibur has to bring the carbon, and the old tmei mace, the old tummy from coming in contact with a corpse, bringing the carbon overrides the tumah. But that's only regarding tumah mess. But let's say there is zavin or matzeiran, that actually you're mavatul, you don't bring the carbon pesach. We don't say that those who have a tzaras should just cut off their tzaras and eat the carbon pesach. Or the kohen who has the tzaras should cut off the tzaras and do the avodah. If let's say the kohen is tamar tzaras and the kal is tar, you don't say that. The tzaras overrides the avodah. You're not going to bring the carbon pesach that year if they have tzaras. So as we continue to the base, and we know the avodah, doing the avodah is more stringent. That it's deiches Shabbos, it overrides Shabbos, because we know in the Beis Hamikdash you bring carbon tamid, carbon musaf, all the carbon tzibur that it has a set time to be done on Shabbos. You do it on Shabbos. Now there's many malachas being done, skinning, all these malachas are being done in the Beis Hamikdash. So you see the avodah is mochamed and Shabbos, and tzaras is mochamed and avodah, because you're not going to do the avodah when there's tzaras. And Mila is Deicha Isa, and Mila overrides Tzaras, as the Gemara is going to bring the next price that we're going to discuss in this Amid, is that it says Yimel Basar Lasaf, and the word Basar, we learn out that even if there's a neg of Tzaras, you do the Mila on the Mokum of the Tzaras. So Shabbos should nitchis in the Avodah, so if Shabbos gets overridden by the Avodah, and Avodah gets overridden by Tzaras, and Tzaras gets overridden by Mila, in addition to Mila Deicha Isa, so isn't it a Kavachem, then Mila should be Deicha Shabbos? So that's what the Talmud was presuming when they said you do the bris milah on the 8th day, that you're going to do it on Shabbos, because milah is bigger than tzaras, tzaras is bigger than avodah, avodah is bigger than Shabbos. So Shabbos all the way down there on the totem pole, milah is all the way on the top. For sure, milah is going to be there for Shabbos. Also, then says Rabbi, my oy ain't the comer. So why was the Tana flip-flopping and then saying, oh, maybe not. Maybe it's not like what he said. Maybe Mila is also included if you do it on Shabbos, it's Mechalel Meisumas. What was the question that he was saying that maybe it's not like I'm saying in the Kal V'chemer? That's his rather because Hada Amar. Then the Tana said to himself that no, who said so? Umimai de Tzaras Chamuro, who's saying that Tzaras is more Chamer than Shabbos to say a Kal V'chemer? Dilma Shabbos Chamuro. Maybe Shabbos more Chamer, as we know, that Shekain Yesh Ba'oinshin V'asaras Harbe, there's many punishments, there's karas, there's many different liabilities for doing Chil of Shabbos. Or Inami, you could say, Umimai, from where do you know that this Tzaras is going to override Avodah? Is because Mishum Dechamirit Tzarasi, because Tzaras is more stringent than the Avodah, which is more than going on to Shabbos, and therefore Mila is bigger than them all. But Dilma, maybe this that we don't say to cut off the Tzaras is not because that it's greater. It's Mishum Gabrahu Delei Chazi. It's simply because the person is not going to be fit to anyways have the carbon. The Gemara is going to explain later on that even if you cut off the Negab Tzaras, you still have to go ahead with your Mitzayr. So you still have to have a Tavila and Harib Shemesh and sundown. That means to say today, you're not going to be able to do that Avodah anyways because a full Yom of Mitzayr is like a Mitzayr. So therefore, there's no Makal V'chemer. Because Mechalel Meis Yumas is going to include even the Bris Milah is going to be forbidden because obviously Shmini Yimol, you're going to say is by other days, not of Shabbos. Because Amanim Mekayim Shmini Yimol, what am I going to say is the 8th day you do the circumcision? It's Chutz MiShabbos, is except for Shabbos. Because if you don't have the Kal V'chemer. What was the Kal V'chemer? That Mila is bigger than Tzaras because Tzaras is bigger than Avodah and Avodah is bigger than Shabbos? It's not true. Who says Tzaras is more Chamer? Yeah, Mila is Dechet Tzaras. But that doesn't mean Tzaras on top of the totem pole. You were saying Tzaras is bigger than everything else because you don't do the Avodah when you have Tzaras. That's not because Tzaras is bigger than that. Not like the Hishama Beneged Tzaras is more Chamer than Avodah. The reason why you don't cut off the Neged Tzaras, not because it's bigger than Avodah. It's simply because it's not going to help. Because even if you cut off the Tzaras, let's say Avodah is bigger. And Avodah is bigger than Shabbos. But Tzaras is not bigger than Avodah. To say Mila is bigger than Tzaras, to be bigger than Avodah, to be bigger than Shabbos. You just don't cut off the Neged Tzaras. It's not going to help you anyway. Even if you cut off the Tzaras today, you wouldn't be able to do that Avodah today anyway. Because you're still a Tameh from Tzaras. Even though you went to the mikveh, you have to wait for sundown. So it's just that the person's not able to do that Avodah anyway, so it's not going to help. So therefore, I would have said that maybe Mila is not bigger than Shabbos, or Tamalema. That's why you need the pasuk by Yom to say during the daytime, Afila b'Shabbos, that even on Shabbos, you could go ahead and do the Mila. That's why you have to come onto that pasuk. That's the explanation of this brayso that we had brought in, simply because of what we showed that it was like a beautiful interpretation. How do you know Mila Zechah Shabbos is from Bayayim, not like we said from Bashmini that we rejected that interpretation. Now, once we brought in this brayso, we bring another brayso that introduces this element that we had. It was part of the previous brayso's logic of Mila being Dechet Tzaras, and also we have a similar type of a discussion from Rabbi to explain what the brayso was. It's Havamina and it's Maskam. Paramount in the brayso. Mila Dechet Tzaras. So Mila overrides Tzaras, meaning to say if there's Tzaras on the Mokum Arlo, although you're never allowed to cut off a negative Tzaras, you could do the Bris Mila, Eis Bris Kodesh, take off the foreskin, and you took off the Tzaras. And that's Bein Bisman and Bein Shalei Bisman. Whether it's in the 8-day-old child, in the Dizman of doing the Mila, or even if it's not during Dizman, let's say it was a child that was sick, you have to wait till it becomes healthy. It doesn't make a difference when you're going to do the Bris Mila, you could always go ahead and override that of Tzaras. Now, however, Yom Tov, ain't a Deicha, but to do the Bris Mila and Yom Tov, it doesn't override the Isser of doing Malach and Yom Tov. El Bisman Levad, only if it's an 8-day-old child. You could only do it on Shabbos and Yom Tov, only if it's Bisman. Now, says the Gemara, Menon Mili. Where do we know this from? That Mila is Deichet Tzaras. Says the Gemara could turn around and learn another place. It says in the Yikra, a pasuk, Yimol B'sar Lasa. He should circumcise the flesh of his foreskin. What that means to say is, V'afal pi shesham beheres, even if there's a negative Tzaras, Yakuts, you should go ahead and cut it off. Now, Man Mekayim, so how am I going to fulfill the pasuk in the bottom that says, Yishama b'neged Tzaras? Be careful, safeguard the negative Tzaras, that you shouldn't be cutting off the negative Tzaras. That B'shar Mekayim, it sounds eerily similar to what we just spoke about with the previous price regarding Shabbos. Here also it's like, okay, that's by other places. Chutz mimila, except for circumcision. Oh, says the Brisa, no. No, maybe when it says to be careful not to cut up neged Tzaras, it's even regarding circumcision. So how am I going to fulfill that? It says you should circumcise the flesh of the foreskin. That's Zman Shem B'Beheres. That's no neged Tzaras. Neged Tzaras, maybe you should not be doing the bris milah. That's what the Brisa is saying. I'm not sure. Tamalei Basar. Did we have an extra word Basar in the pasuk? That's a ribui. It's an extra word which to tell you drasha. To tell you, Even if there's a neg of tzaras, the extra word basa is coming to tell you no matter what the flesh is, you're going to cut it off even if it has a neg of tzaras. That's the source for the mila being daicha, overriding that of a neg of tzaras, which you not only cut off, mila is allowed, we know from the extra word basa. Now, Amar Rav, as in the previous brisa, he says, Hi Tana, this Tana. In the beginning, what was so obvious to him that he said, yeah, of course. It says in the pasuk, Yimel b'sar lasei. That would mean you could go ahead and do the mila even if there's a neg. Besides Mike and Kasha, at the end when he says, Eina Ella, he says, no, you know what, on second thought, maybe not. Maybe you can't go ahead and do the mila. And when it says the Shom Neg Tzaras, it means even mila. And when it says to do Yimel b'sar lasei, when there's no neg Tzaras. Well, why did he suddenly think maybe not, and that he needed a pasuk to tell you that you could? So it says Rabbi Hachim, this is what the Tana was saying. It says in the pasuk, Yima b'sar lasei should circumcise the skin of his foreskin, Rav b'shish b'heres, even there's a neg of tzaras. Now, man v'kaim, when am I going to fulfill a shama neg of tzaras? These are all the words of the brisa. The b'sham v'kaim is by other places chutz mila except for circumcision. But mila, deiches tzaras, it would override tzaras. That was the first part of the brisa. Says Rabbi Maikam, what was the reasoning that the Tana assumed that you could go ahead and mila being deiches tzaras? Because the asim b'kabel chaymer, again, sounds very similar to the first brisa. It also comes from b'kabel chaymer. Shabbos chamur, if Shabbos is stringent, yet Mila Deicha Isa, but Mila is Deicha Shabbos, that's where we just learned that from a pasuk, from the previous brisa. We learned that from Bayayim, that Mila is Deicha Shabbos. So Tzaras like Kosh again. So if Shabbos is one of the most common Yisurim, and Mila overrides Shabbos, so for sure it should override that of Tzaras. Now, okay, I understand why the Tana presumed that it's Deicha Tzaras. So my oy ain't the comment. So why are you saying, maybe not? On second thought, maybe not. Why not? Shabbos for sure should be Deicha Tzaras. And that says the Brisa how they come. Now the Brisa said like this: Mimai Shabbos Chamira. Who said Shabbos is more stringent than Tzaras to tell me that if I'm Deicha Shabbos, I for sure could be Deicha Tzaras. Timot Tzaras Chamira. No, Tzaras has a stringency. Shekain Deicha Savaida. Like we said, Tzaras, you don't cut off Tzaras to do the Avaida. Avaida Deicha Shabbos and Avaida we do in the base of Mikdash all types of malachas and Shabbos. So maybe Tzaras is more common than Shabbos. So maybe even though Milah is Deicha Shabbos, maybe it wouldn't be Deicha Tzaras. So therefore it's not a kavachem. Therefore tamalem basa. That's where to learn it from a pasuk to say avav pishesh maheres. Even if there is over there neg of tzaras, to tell you that that the milah is deichet tzaras, you wouldn't know it from a kavachem from Shabbos, because on the one hand we could say that tzaras is more chamer than Shabbos, because tzaras is deichet abayda, which abayda is deichet that of Shabbos. That's one version. Lishna Achlin, another version to explain the brisa was like this: the brisa presumed milah deichet tzaras, that circumcision overrides tzaras. My time, why would presume that milah is deichet tzaras? The Tana assumed the asi aseh, because the positive commandment of circumcision comes along with dachi loisa say, and it rejects, it overrides the negative prohibition of hisham alacham, which the Gemara in Yevamos Daf Gimel and Beis famously says, aseh is deicha loisa say. A positive commandment overrides a negative prohibition. So the mitzvah aseh of bris milah is deicha the loisa say of cutting off a negative tzaras. That's what the Tana presumed originally. This is again the second interpretation of what the Brisa was saying. Now, why was he saying maybe not? Yeah, obviously, I said the chalisa say. What do you need a pasuk for? No, hadar kama then. That's what the time the Brisa says. When do I say a positive commandment overrides a negative prohibition? That's leisa say gradum. That's just a regular negative prohibition. Hi, over here by negative tzaras, it's asay v'loisa sehu. It's a positive and a negative commandment, like Rashi brings. Hishamar always connotes v'loisa say. Be careful. Safeguard is what not to do. And there's a pasuk in the Varm Chavdal that says "V'lasas kachol hasher yayu," to do as they command you. That's an asay. So by tzaras it says an asay and a lois asay. So therefore, I would say no, you cannot say asay deicha the lois asay of neged tzaras, because it's a lois asay and asay. A positive commandment does not override something else that has a positive and the negative with it. So then you're back to the question: how am I going to explain circumcising the flesh of the foreskin? That does not change baheres. That's when there's no baheres. So therefore, I wouldn't know that the milah is deichet tzaras. That's where the extra word basa to tell you even if there is over there a negative tzaras from the extra word basar or lasai, we learn out that milah is going to be deichet tzaras. Now the Gemara asks like this: Teinach gadol. This that you're telling me that you know that milah is deichet tzaras from the extra word of basar. So I understand a 13-year-old boy who dichsiv behu basar. By him, it says in his pasuk, as we quoted before, it says in Bereshit Yud Zayin, va'orul zacha. Rashi brings the pasuk: if there's a male boy that's uncircumcised, that didn't circumcise es besar or lasai, the flesh of his foreskin, so then he's punishable by kares. Now that's told obviously by an adult, because if it's making him liable for kares, obviously he's an adult, because a child that's 10 years old, for example, is not chayav kares. If it's making him liable for kares, it must be because he's an adult. So by an adult, it says basar. Fine, I understand that's going to be deichet tzuras because it has the extra word basar to tell you. Didn't have to say the word basar, just say the yimel or lasei. What's basar or lasei? Basar is the extra word to tell you that, including even if there's a tzuras over there. So I understand by an adult. Katanami, also a second character, an 8-day-old child, bismana, on 8 days old, ksiv be basar, here by his pasuk, it also says the word basar. It says, basar or lasei, a different pasuk. So by both of them, I know that they're going to be deichet tzuras, because by both of them it says the extra word basar. Again, an 8-day-old child, or a 13-year-old boy. But beinani, a child in between, let's say it's already past the 8th day, but he's not yet 13 years old. So his father is commanded to do the bris milah for his son. And we learn this out as the Gemara says, you should circumcise all males. There, it doesn't say in that context the word basar. Minolan, where do we know by that child from 9 days old until 13 years old, where do we know that bris milah would be deichet tzuras? We don't have a source. Again, we only have the extra word basar by 8-day-old, which is unique, it's bismana. That's its own category. Whereby 13-year-old who has his own pasuk that also says basar. But in that intermediate period, we don't know. Where do we know a source that would be deichet tzuras? So we have two interpretations of the Gemara. Amabai says, Asim Mibinai. We learn it out from the two of them, from what's called the Tzad HaShav, the common denominator, where by both of them you do a circumcision that's deichet tzuras. I'm also going to bring this child, this intermediate child, that you do circumcision and it overrides tzuras, as the Gemara explains. Megodol Ayasi, right? You cannot learn out this, let's say, 9-year-old from that 13-year-old. Shkin onish kares. The 13-year-old has a punishment of kares. It's the most severe category. Maybe over there it could be deichet tzuras because he's got to do his milah because it's a very severe category. Mekodol Ayasi, neither can you learn out from an 8-day-old child. Shkin milah bismana. That's a pretty severe category. Also, it's a mitzvah bismana. That's deichet Shabbos. Milah shel bismana is not even deichet Shabbos. But at Tzad HaShabbos, what's the common denominator between the 8-day-old and the 13-year-old? Is shekein l'maylim, where they have the circumcision, but deichet tzuras, it overrides tzuras. Meaning, and you can't tell me the reason is because of kares, because the 8-year-old doesn't have kares. You can't tell me because of bismana, the 13-year-old is also not bismana. But what's the common denominator that they do have? Is that they're circumcised and it's deichet tzuras. Of course, also any child that has a circumcision is going to override tzuras. That's the interpretation of Abaya. We learned it out from Tzad HaShav. Rav Amma gives a different interpretation. He says, Mila bismana deiche. He says, no, there's two pasukim that we have of bisar. One pasuk is by the 8-day-old, and one pasuk is by the 13-year-old. Says Rava, I'll tell you that second pasuk, Mila bismana deicha, the fact that a circumcision on 8 days that is deichet tzuras, lo tzricha kra, that doesn't need a pasuk. And therefore, as Rashi explains, the extra pasuk basar by the 8-day-old is telling you for a non-8-day-old. It's telling you for the intermediate child. As like Taisus brings that it's called what's called an Eina Yinyan, if it's not telling you regarding what it said in the context of 8-day-old, because you don't need it, as we're about to bring, so that pasuk will tell you regarding the intermediate child. He says, why don't you need a pasuk to tell you that the 8-day-old is deichet tzuras? It says, Mekabel Chemer Asya. It says, you know from Mekabel Chemer. What's the Kabel Chemer? Uma Shabbos Techamira. If Shabbos, that's pretty severe. It's a very big isser. Deicha Mila, we said in the previous braces, Deicha Shabbos. So tzuras a kol sheken? Isn't it a kol sheken that if Mila is Deicha Shabbos and be Deicha tzuras? So on that, the Gemara asks, wait a second. Amalei Rav Safar Rabbi says, Memayde Shabbos Chamira. Who said that Shabbos is more severe to say the foundation of this Kabel Chemer, that Mil Deicha Shabbos, for sure it's going to be Deicha tzuras? Dimat tzuras chamir. No, maybe tzuras is more chamer, and therefore you would need a pasuk to tell you that the 8-day-old is going to be deichet tzuras. Shkin deiches avodah. We see that tzuras overrides doing the avodah b'sem mikdash, and avodah deiches Shabbos, and avodah overrides doing malacha on Shabbos. So maybe tzuras is more chamer. Maybe even though I know mil is deiches Shabbos, I would need a source for the 8-day-old that's deichet tzuras. Says Gemara, no, hasav lav mishum dechamir tzuras. That's not because tzuras is more chamer than avodah. Mishum degaber hu deleichazi. It's only because the person is not fit, which. Wait a second, at this point the Gemara assumes the reason why he's not fit is because he's tummy through the tzuras. So therefore that's why he can't do the avodah. So that's why the Gemara asks, Amai, wait a second, why is the person not fit to do the avodah if he has tzuras? But v'yakutz b'harasai, let him cut off his nega of tzuras, he'll be tar. V'yavin, let him do the avodah. Says the Gemara, no, b'chusat tvilahu, as we had mentioned this in the previous sugya. He's not fit to do the avodah that day anyway, because he still has to go to the mikveh and wait for sundown. So even if you cut off, it wouldn't help you. And to tell me that for tomorrow, that avodah is not here right now, that's not going to override the Isser of Tzaras. So it's not that Tzaras is necessarily bigger than Avodah, it's just not going to help you. And I'm not going to let you cut off today so you have tomorrow's Avodah, because tomorrow's Avodah is not here yet. So that's why you don't override the Avodah, but not because it's greater. So therefore, from the fact that Mila is Deicha Shabbos, we would say it's Deicha Tzaras, because Tzaras is not bigger than Avodah, and therefore of Shabbos. Because Tzaras, you only don't cut it off simply because it's not going to help. But if it's Deicha Shabbos, for sure it's going to be Deicha Tzaras, and therefore if we know it from a couple of them, you don't need it to take the 8-day-old. Must be the extra pasuk of Basar is teaching you from 9-day-old until 13 from that medium age child, and not for the 8-day-old child. So those are two different interpretations. Abai says, you know, from Masada Shava. Rabbi says, you know from the word Basar, because you don't need to tell me this from the 8-day-old, because the 8-day-old itself, you know from a Kabbalah Chema. But that says the Gemara, wait a second, I'm not done with you. Teinach Negoim Tmei. But your answer only works for a nega that has tumah to it. Negoim Tahirim, interesting, there's a nega that's actually tar, that doesn't have tumah with it. Like if it has what's called bayak, which are white spots. Or let's say if the tzaras went and spread throughout the entire person's body, the person's actually tar, not tummy. There's no tumah of tzaras. Now the thing is, however, those tzaras are actually still in the isra of cutting them off, as the Sifri brings. I would only know that if there's tumah related to the tzaras. How do I know even if there's no tumah, you're not allowed to cut off the tzaras? That's what the pasuk says, Kachayla Shageru, whatever they're going to rule, you're not allowed to cut off any tzaras, even if there's no tumah to it. So therefore the Gemara is asking your answer of what you're telling me, that you're not allowed to cut off the tzaras when you want to do avodah, not because it's mochama, simply because it's not going to help you, because you're going to still be tummy anyway. But wait a second, that only works when you have tumah. But when there's a negative tara, what are you going to say? Why don't you cut off and do the avodah? Your answer falls off. If you tell me it's not, if you tell me it's mochamer, fine, it says mochamer, you know, I cut it off to do the avodah. But if you tell me it's not really, it's less chamer. But you don't cut off something that's not going to help. Why is it not going to help? Because you be tummy. Well, it's only by tzaras that has tumah. Tzaras that has tara, like white spots, it's not true. You could cut it off, and you would be tar. So why don't you cut it off over there? So the Gemara says you're right. The Gemara falls off that approach. Elamar Ravashi, rather Ravashi says to answer Rav Sarfar's question, he says, this that we're saying, the Shabbos is Mochamed and Tzaras, even though Tzaras overrides Avodah and Avodah overrides Shabbos, is not because of the stringency of Tzaras. Rather, the reason is the following svara, an important klal in Aseh Dech Aloisase. When do we say that a positive commandment overrides a negative prohibition, which that's what you would be doing with the Mila and Tzaras? That's Kigay Mila bit Tzaras. For example, when you're doing the circumcision, the moment that the moil is taking off the arla, which is the Mila itself, is the moment he's doing the lav of cutting off the Tzaras. Or Yinami Tzitzis B'Klayim. Let's say a person has a wool and linen tzitzis. The moment that he's putting on the tzitzis is the moment that he's overriding, that he's doing the isra of wearing klayim, of Shabbos. The be'idna, the misakalav, the moment that he's uprooting the negative prohibition, kamukam asay, it's that same moment that he's doing the positive commandment. Oh, so that's what we're saying, that at the time when you're cutting off the tzaras, you're doing the lav, you're fulfilling the mitzvah asay. So to tzitzis, by klayim, the moment you're wearing it, you're uprooting the lav, you're mimikayim the asay. But hach over here, by tzaras, that you're going to cut off because you want to do the avodah, in the moment that you're doing the isra of cutting off the tzaras, yet you're not fulfilling at that moment the mitzvah of doing the avodah. It's only going to be later. First, you got to cut it off. You got to get onto your big day. You got to go and do the avodah. But the moment you're doing the lav, you're not fulfilling the mitzvah say. So therefore, that's why you're not allowed to cut off the neg of tzaras. And therefore, by default, the avodah will be rejected, but not because tzaras is mochamer, simply because you cannot say asay doichal lois asay. Because Aseh Dech is only the moment that you're fulfilling the Aseh, that's when you're overriding the Lois Aseh. But if you have to first do the Isser and only later do the Aseh, then we don't say Aseh Dech Lois Aseh. So again, we're back to the Svara to answer Rav Sarfar's question. No, if Mila could be Dech Shabbos, says Rava, this is the evolution of this interpretation of Rava. Rava says a child older than 8 days also overrides Tzaras, that we know from a Kabbalah Chema. As we know from Tzaras being Dech Avodah being Deicha Shabbos, if we said that, he said that Mila is Deicha Shabbos, for sure it's going to be Deicha Tzaras. So you don't need a source for an 8-day-old child. He says, therefore, the extra pasuk of Basar by the 8-day-old child is actually telling you for, let's say, a 9-day-old or a 10-year-old, whatever, for that whole medium period. On that, Rav Sarfar asks, wait a second. He says, not true. Tzaras is more chamer than Shabbos. If Tzaras is Deicha Avodah, which Avodah is Deicha Shabbos, so maybe Mila is Deicha Shabbos. Who said it would be Deicha Tzaras? On that says the Gemara, no. There's a concept of a Seder Chalaisasei. That's only be'inna demes akalav kamokam asay, by Mila and Tzaras, then you have that. But over here, you don't have that concept because tzaras is not because it's more chomer than Shabbos. It's simply because you cannot say asay dechalois say to do the cutting off the baheres. At that time, you're doing the lav, but you're not fulfilling the mitzvah, the mitzvah of doing the avodah. So you can't say asay dechalois say. So not again that tzaras is more chomer. Mila and Shabbos, Mila and the Tzaras, the moment that you're doing the Issa is the moment you're doing the Asay. That therefore, we're back to the approach of Rabbah that says that if you Deicha Shabbos, for sure it's going to be Deicha that of Tzaras. Now the Gemara just ends off, it says, Bahad the Rabbah Safra, this machlokes that they have is the same type of Koflama Gimel and Alf, is Tanoi, it's a machlokes Tanoim. In other words, there are those who learn out that Mila Bizmanam, we know from a Kavah Chomer, that's like Rabbah, and when the Pasuk is coming to tell us is for the Shaloi Bizmanam, what we call the Beinani. And there are those who don't learn enough Makabal Chemer, which we're going to quote right now, and they need the pasuk to tell you Mila Bismana, which is like Rav Safra, and because Shalei Bismana they learn like Abaya from a Tzara Shava, from the 8-year-old and the 13-year-old. They're telling learn the Brisa. This is the pasuk that we're quoting all along that it says Uvayem Eshmini Yimul Bisar Lasai. When it says the word Bisar is extra to tell you about the Bishesh and Beheres, even though there's a negative Tzaras, Yimul you should circumcise it. That's Dibri Bisha, it's opinion of Bisha, which that's like Rav Safra. Rabbi Yomi, he says no, in Tzarech you don't need a Kabal Chemer. Shabbos chamur deicha if Shabbos which is severe. Mila is deicha. Tzaras a kolshken. Isn't a kolshken? Isn't a kabel chayim? It would be deicha tzaras. That's like Rabbi. So you see the machlekes we have in the Gemara. Where do we know the source for the 8-year-old child that is learned out again either from basar that's deicha. That's like the one interpretation, or that no, you don't need it because you know it from a kabel chayim, and that's because tzaras being deicha boyd, like we said, is madi chumra. That's the machlekes amaram that we had. It's a machlekes tanoim. Some of this we spoke about in today's Daf, in Shabbos Daf Kuf Lamed Beis. We had a machlekes on the Mishnah opening up this parak regarding Hechsheri Mila, if it's Deicha Shabbos. And we said yes, but everyone agrees, but by Mila itself, that it would be Deicha Shabbos. How do we know that? So that was where the Gemara opened up. Either we know from Malachim Mishra Sinai, which the Gemara says, no, you can't say that. Because if that's the case, how do you learn a Pekuach Nefesh from a Kabal Chemer from Mila? If Mila is Malachim Mishra Sinai, and we can't learn that a Kabal Chemer from Malachim Mishra Sinai because that's only in Torah Shabbat Kseb, not in Torah Shabbat Peh. So then the Gemara brought a second interpretation. Now, in the second interpretation, there's a few layers till we got to the right interpretation. It's not a Gzer Shabbos from the word ice from Shabbos, because then Tzvon should also be Deicha Shabbos. Neither can it be from the word bris, so if that's the case, then an adult, 13-year-old, should also be Deicha, because by him it also says the word bris. Can't learn that from Dairis, because then Tzitzit should also be Deicha Shabbos, because it also says Dairis. Now the Gemara finally concluded for that interpretation, it has the word ice, has the word bris, and has the word Dairis, and Shabbos and Mila, the only ones that have all those three words. That's why how we know that Mila is going to be done even on Shabbos. Third interpretation was we know from the word Bayoim, to tell you even on Shabbos. Now, although Mechutz Kapar also says the word Bayoim, but that's to tell you, and not at nighttime. Now, although, what I mean, you already know it cannot be a nighttime karbanis from a different pasuk, Bayim Tzavaisai, which is in general regarding all karbanis as be during the daytime, that you would have thought to say that no, since the Torah is more merciful on the Mechutz Kapara, that their karbanis, like the Mitzvah, could be brought even cheap karbanis, so you see we go easy on him, so you'd have thought that he could even do it at nighttime. That's why we have to tell you, Kamash Malan, we have to tell you another pasuk to tell you that it's Bayoim, V'loy Balayla, but it's not telling you Bayoim even no matter what day it is, even on Shabbos. Now, ultimately, we even invalidate a Zar and a Einan for doing it even by that of Mechutz Kapara, because since ultimately we do invalidate nighttime, so that tells us we're going to all the halachas, it has all the halachas like all karbanas, which are going to be invalid to be done at nighttime, and also by a Zar and a Einan. The fourth interpretation we learned out from the word Shmini, no matter the 8th day, no matter what it is, and the Gemara rejects it because you need Shmini to exclude two psukim say Shmini, one to exclude the 7th day, and one to exclude even the 9th day. Then Rav explained the brisa, and he says that this that Mila is Deicha Shabbos, there was a shakla v'tarya in that brisa. And basically what it comes down to is, do we really say it's a kabel chemer from tzaras, which is chamer, and if it's Deicha tzaras, which is Deicha avodah, which is Deicha Shabbos, for sure it should be Deicha Shabbos, or do we say that no, tzaras is not a chumrah of avodah, it's simply that the person's just not fit to do it because he's still going to be tummy anyway, and therefore that's why it's not Deicha, that's why it's Deicha avodah, it's not because it's bigger than avodah. So that's why we needed to have a pasuk to tell you that Mila is going to be Deicha Shabbos, even though we know it's Deicha Tzaras. Then we had another brayso, which actually almost like the flip of the first brayso, it also had a shaka b'tarya, that it telling you how we know Mila is Deicha Tzaras. So basically, the discussion was, if we learn out that Mila is Deicha Shabbos, which is more chamer, then for sure it should be a kal sheken that's Deicha Tzaras. Or do you say that no, maybe Tzaras is more chamer, because Deicha Avodah, which is Deicha Shabbos. Or a second, and therefore, since we don't know, therefore we need to have a pasuk to tell you that Mila is going to be Deicha, that of Tzaras. Or another version was that, yes, either maybe you'll say Aseh Deicha Leisaseh. So the Aseh of Mila is going to be Deicha the Leisaseh of Hishamar Benega Tzaras, or cutting off a nega of Tzaras. Or whether you say no, there it's Aseh and a Leisaseh, there it cannot be Deicha. Then we need to have the pasuk of Basar, which the pasuk of Basar tells you extra word. It doesn't have to say Yimel Besar or Laseh, because it just said Yimel or Laseh. To tell you, no matter what Basar, even if there is a Beheres over there, the Mila is going to be Deicha nega of Tzaras. Now, how do you know that of the Beinani, which is basically from 9 days old until 13 years old? How do we know that category that is Deicha Tzaras? It doesn't say by him the word Basa. So either we know it from between the two of them, of the Katan Bismanoi and the Gadol, where by both of them it says Basa, and what's the Tzad HaShava of them is that they're Mila and it's Deicha Tzaras. So too the intermediate one, because it's neither one of their stringencies, because each one doesn't have the other ones. Or we know, says Rabbi, no, because Mila Bismana, the one by the 8-day-old child, doesn't need a pasuk. That you know from a Kabbalah Chaimer that if it overrides Shabbos, for sure it's going to override that of Tzaras. So therefore that pasuk is going to tell you for the medium one, for the boy that's between 9 days old and 13 years old. Now, but then says the Gemara, what do you do with a nega that has tahara? You can't say that he's quote unquote a full yom. So there, why don't you say that, yeah, if nega is not more chamer than avodah, so then say that you should actually cut off the nega of tzaras to do the avodah then. But the Gemara says no, then you're not going to be able to say asay deicha leisaseh over there. Because it's only the idna, the mesarkel alav, then you're fulfilling the mitzvah asay, then you're going to say asay deicha leisaseh. But you're not going to say to say that the asay of avodah is deicha the leisaseh of tzaras, because when you're doing the leisaseh, you're not yet doing the avodah. So you're not going to say asay deicha leisaseh. So again, it doesn't mean that it's more chamer. It just means simply you're not going to be able to do the concept of a Seder Chaletzei, and therefore we still maintain our approach that it's not because Tzaras is Mochamer. Rather, Rabbi says that Shabbos is Mochamer, and if the 8-day-old is Deicha Shabbos, for sure it's going to be Deicha that Tzaras. So I don't need a pasuk for the 8-day-old, and rather the pasuk, the extra pasuk of Basar is telling you the boy that's 9 days old until 13 years old. That's the extra pasuk of Basar. That's the source according to Rabbi. According to Ba'i knows it from a Tzad Shabbos to them. Rabbi says no, the pasuk is not for the 8-day-old because that you know from a Kabbalah Chaimer. And then just the Gemara ends up by saying that it is a machlekes Tanoim that have the same machlekes we have basically between the Abai and Rava. How do you know the intermediate one? Do you know it from the word Basar, or do you know it from, meaning the 8-day-old, do you know it from Basar, or do you know it from a Kabbalah Chaimer? And you don't need it. That would be like Rava that says that you need it for the intermediate one. Thank you to any time for hosting us.